system. This is all the cartilage and bones of the body. What's the major function of skeletal system? Structure, support somewhere. Hold the body up, is that what I heard? Okay, yeah, so hold the body up. Also things like blood cell production is gonna be where we have hematopoiesis in the bone marrow. So it's gonna give basic shape, support, assist the muscular system, so mobility, and then also protection of our vital organs, like the heart and lungs that are in the thoracic cavity. We can divide the skeletal system into two parts. Axial will be along the midline, the skull is axial, the spine is axial, the sternum and the vertebral column, as well as the thoracic cavity. Those are going to be more important for protection. The appendicular skeleton will be everything from the limb girdle, which includes the scapula, clavicle, and the limb bones, as well as the hip girdle, which includes the hip bone and the, again, corresponding limb bones. So axial protection support, and then appendicular will be more for movement ability. We can divide the bones based upon different types of classification, their shape, their size. This will make a lot more sense when we get into the musculoskeletal system. But long bones are tubular, they have a long shaft. What are some examples? The femur, right, longest bone in the body, the humerus, the phalanges of the digits are also long bones. Flat bones are flat. What function might they have? So protection, right? Think about the skull protecting the brain, the sternum protecting the thoracic cavity, the ribs are considered flat bones. Irregular bones are bones that are neither short, flat, or long, mainly the facial bones. Short bones would be the bones at the wrist or the ankle, right? The carpals or the tarsals. And then sesamoid bones are specific bones that are found within tendons that help the tendons to move smoothly. The patella would be the main example. Okay. Let's go on to the muscular system. So also for movement in some cases, this is contractile tissue. This can be voluntary in the case of skeletal muscle, or it can be involuntary in the case of cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. So we have three basic types of muscle. Two of these are considered to be striated muscle, in that the fibers arrange themselves in this elongated, sort of striated way. That's cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. So although one is voluntary, skeletal, one is involuntary, they're both considered striated muscle. Some of the areas you find skeletal muscle, your limbs, of course, and then heart would be the cardiac muscle, but also the aorta. The aorta is going to be having a little bit of smooth and some cardiac as well. And then lastly, smooth muscle is going to be our involuntary muscle. This is going to be important as far as motility in the gastrointestinal tract. Smooth muscles also found lining blood vessels, lining hollow cavities like the stomach, like the reproductive organs, the reproductive tract. All of those will have smooth or involuntary muscle. Looking at, again, the nomenclature, so muscles can be named according to their shape, size, actions, functions, location. Pennate muscles are going to be feather-like muscles that kind of fan out. They can be unipennate, bipennate, or multipennate, depending on the number of heads. Fusiform muscles are going to be spindle-shaped, and they're going to have tapered ends. We'll talk about some of those examples. Parallel muscles will have muscles that are running along a certain axis, right? So think about flat muscles like your external oblique, which also end in aponeurosis, where those fibers are moving in that parallel direction. Convergent muscles have fibers that move to a single tendon, and then circular muscles are rounded muscles. Think about your orbicularis oculi around the eye, oris around the mouth, or even some of your sphincters, right? Those are circular muscles. Lastly, digastric muscles have two bellies. We talked about one example earlier being the biceps. They'll have two different bellies or two different heads. Okay, now some of these terms will help you understand the function again, or some aspect of the muscle, the shape, the size, the location, and the origins it has, or its action. So ad is a muscle that is moving towards the midline. Adductor longus, adductor brevis. Sub is a muscle that's underneath. We'll talk about subscapularis on the undersurface of the scapula. Anti is a muscle that moves against, right? Epi is a muscle that's on top, right? Again, epi and sub being oppositional terms. Longissimus is the longest muscle, okay? Whereas longus is just a long muscle. So if we think about adductor longus, it'll be longer than adductor brevis. So longus, long, brevis, short. Maximus, medius, and minimus, these are usually seen together. The gluteus is a good example of this. The biggest version of that muscle, the medium, and then the smallest version of that muscle. Rectus is a muscle that is straight. Rectus femoris, right? Elongated vertical muscle. Rectus abdominis, also elongated. And then if we think about quad, tri, bi, I think we mentioned this earlier, but then externus and internus would be inside versus outside, and we'll see some of those when we look at the hip and gluteal muscles. Okay, let's look at the nervous system. So this one is the system that is responsible for communication. Lots of nerves and synapses that are formed throughout the nervous system. The brain and spinal cord are going to constitute the central nervous system, kind of the CEO of the nervous system. And then we have ganglia, peripheral nerves, motor and sensory endings, which will constitute the peripheral nervous system. So anything outside of brain and spinal cord, which are receiving instructions from brain and spinal cord, or giving instructions to brain and spinal cord, will be considered the peripheral nervous system. We can also divide the nervous system functionally. So there's a somatic nervous system, which is basically what type of tissue? Any thoughts? Skeletal muscle, this is going to be voluntarily controlled muscle. So I can make a decision to move my biceps, move my triceps. Those are all voluntarily controlled. Versus autonomic. Autonomic is involuntary. This will control smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glandular tissue, and adipose tissue as well. And we can further divide the autonomic system into sympathetic and parasympathetic, which you'll look at in one of your future sessions. Now, also in the nervous system would be the sensory organs, your olfactory, your vision, your gustatory, which is taste, etc. And if you think about the nervous system structures, neurons, for example, are going to be the main cells of the nervous system, whereas glia will be anything that's supporting. So not a nervous tissue itself, no action potential, but another structure that will support nervous tissue. The respiratory system. So this is going to supply oxygen to our cells and tissues, as well as exchange that for carbon dioxide. We can look at various structures or sort of a pathway from the nasal cavity all the way down to the lungs, right? The nasal cavity, the pharynx, which is the shared region generally called the throat, the larynx, which is the inlet to the trachea. This is helping to produce voice as well. The trachea itself, which is this cartilaginous and smooth muscle tract. And then the bronchial tree. So this trachea will start dividing to give us several different structures that lead down to the lungs. Those will be constituting the bronchial tree. And finally, the lungs, which are paired visceral organs in the thoracic cavity. Those will be the main site of gas exchange. There are a lot of different accessory structures that help with respiration. The diaphragm is one of the major muscles that will help control the movement and shape of the thoracic cavity. All right. The cardiovascular system. So this one is probably my favorite. This is going to be the heart and the major vessels and the blood, right? The blood that is circulating in the cardiovascular system or in the blood vessels will also be a part. So it's going to help carry and deliver oxygen and nutrients. So that oxygen that we just exchanged across the lungs will move throughout the circulatory or cardiovascular system. So we have a central pump, which is the heart. The heart is going to have 4 different chambers. And again, we'll talk more in detail about what those are when we look at the cardiovascular system. But there are 2 general systems. There's a pulmonary circulation, which is where blood goes to the lungs to pick up oxygen. And then a systemic circulation, which is where blood goes to drop that oxygen off and then come back to the heart. So two sort of parallel circuits that are running and helping to deliver and mobilize oxygen and nutrients. We can also think about the blood vessels as part of the cardiovascular system. We've got arteries and veins. Arteries are going to be moving blood away from the heart. So not always thinking about oxygenated versus deoxygenated, because there are some arteries that have deoxygenated blood. So the main description or definition of an artery is its direction of flow away from the heart. Veins are moving blood towards the heart, okay, bringing blood back from the general circulation or lungs. If we look at the vessels, they're going to have three main layers. There's a tunica intima, which is the innermost endothelial lining. We'll talk about what endothelium is, but it's a type of epithelium. Tunica media, which is the middle layer, mainly smooth muscle. And then tunica adventitia, which is an outer connective tissue. So all of your vessels, including your heart, because you can think about the heart as being a really big blood vessel, right? Well-developed blood vessel. That will also have these three layers. Okay, the gastrointestinal system. So here is where we have food or our major biomolecules, carbohydrates, proteins, fats being ingested and digested and absorbed and moving through this inner tract. So it's going to go through the esophagus, into the stomach, then into your small intestines, then your large intestines, and then your rectum, and then waste can be expelled. Now, along the way, there are a few glands, right? We have pancreas being a major gland, the liver being another major gland, the salivary glands that are going to release some accessory enzymes to help with each of those processes. And if you think about the function here, as I mentioned earlier, ingestion, taking food in, breaking it down is mastication, deglutition would be swallowing, digestion would be breaking that down, usually through hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and then absorption is uptaking of those nutrients, and then elimination of waste. Okay, the renal system. So this is the kidneys, and really where we produce urine as a byproduct of filtering the blood. This is one of the elimination systems that helps to clean and filter the blood. We have two kidneys. Anyone know where the kidneys are located? Yeah, so kind of your flank, lumbar region typically, and they're closer to the posterior body wall. So they're not really in the abdomen per se, they're part of the posterior abdomen. Then we have two ureters, which are tracts that lead that urine towards the bladder. The bladder is really a fancy storage tank. It's going to store that urine there until it can be expelled. And then the urethra will be the tract that eliminates that through the external body. Okay. Reproductive system will include the testes, epididymis, the penis as the genitalia, and then a few accessory glands that are going to help produce fluids and other structures in order to create semen. We'll talk about that in the reproductive system some more, but it's generally the reproductive function of males. And similarly with females, we have the major endocrine glands themselves, which are the ovaries, the genitalia being the clitoris, labia majus, and minus, and then again, a few accessory glands and structures that help with that reproductive tract and reproductive function. The integumentary system, so this one is the skin and all of the layers of the skin, the dermis, the epidermis. Anyone what the main function of skin is? Protection. Yeah, it's also going to act as somewhat of an endocrine organ with vitamin D absorption, but also just general protection, right, and containment of our body structures and maintenance of our various water compartments and fluid balance. It's also going to have a thermoregulatory function, keeping us hot in cool areas and warm in cold. Okay. Lastly would be the lymphatic system. So this is basically a parallel circuit to the cardiovascular or circulatory system. This is where we filter excess fluid and run that through lymphatic vessels, lymphatic nodes, as a way to clean and purge extra fluid from the cardiovascular system. It's going to prevent an accumulation of debris in the cardiovascular system, essentially. And so the main organs involved are our lymph nodes, our lymph, which is the fluid that's moving through these vessels, the lymphatic vessels and plexuses themselves, as well as some of the major lymphoid organs like the thymus, where T cells mature, the bone marrow, as you mentioned earlier, the spleen, and tonsils, etc.